Hi there, I'm Dr. Ashley Sandeen, one of the pediatric intensivists and an APD of the pediatric residency program. I am here today to introduce to you the first quarter of our wellness curriculum and give you a bit of an overview on the initial information that we plan to cover this quarter. I ask that if these types of conversations are new to you, that you approach them with an open mind and willingness to learn something new and apply what seems useful in your own life. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. When we think about wellness, there's a lot of different definitions, and I think each of us personally have our own definitions, as some of you saw at the intern GME welcome. When we look at some of the definitions that are out there, I think it makes it more useful to understand exactly what we're talking about. When we look at the Oxford Dictionary, they state wellness is a state of being in good health, especially as an actively pursued goal. The Global Wellness Institute describes it as the active pursuit of activities, choices, or lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. And the WHO describes it as a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being that is not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. We also see here that wellness and well-being are often used interchangeably, and that well-being can sometimes be used in the definition of wellness. So what does that mean? Well, the CDC defines well-being as that there's no real consensus, but a general agreement that at a minimum, our well-being can include the presence of positive emotions and moods, so like contentment or happiness, the absence of negative emotions like depression and anxiety, satisfaction with your life, fulfillment and positive functioning. And so in more simple terms, they describe that well-being can be described as judging life positively and overall feeling good. They also add that when we consider this term when used for public health purposes, that we should include that physical well-being is also important and critical into achieving an overall well-being, both in our minds and in our bodies. As we begin to think about these things today, I'll give you a little bit of an outline of what we plan to cover. So we're going to look back at kind of our normal brain. How do we think? Why do we think the way we do? Learning about observing our thoughts, how those thoughts can then become beliefs, how those beliefs really can form our identity, and those identities or stories that we have lead to our overall legacy in life. And then we'll start to work through what the power of knowledge and choice is when we start to think about the thoughts that we get to choose. So as we start to get further into our conversation today, the other thing I ask is that you really start to learn to trust yourself. If you don't yet, that's okay. I challenge you to lean into those gut instincts that you have and begin to learn from within yourself. We work to develop trust for ourselves, just like we develop trust for others. And that is developed by strengthening our understanding of our thoughts and our feelings and our intuition. While we're all really different, I hope to share with you some ways that we are all really alike in the way we think, the way we process information, and the way that we often approach different situations. Today, we'll be laying the foundation and discovering the way that our thinking brain works. We'll discuss some of the reasons we show up, think, and act the way we do, and learn that if you understand these inner workings and normal tendencies, it can really give us a lot of power over our brain rather than letting it work against us. As we begin to work through this lecture today, I challenge you to begin to think of a way that your brain has ruled over you or taken over in particular situations or events. Some examples that you can think of could be thoughts about maybe being not good enough, comparing yourself to others, thinking of all the things you really think you should be doing or shouldn't be doing, thoughts about our body image, thoughts about perceptions that we may have about others or that we think others may have about us. All right, so let's dive into learning more about our brains. When we look at the research from evolutionary psychologists, we learn that the brain has really only evolved about 10% from the caveman era. So what does this mean? Well, it means that our brains are really wired for survival. And why would that matter? Well, this survival-based brain really can take hold of a lot of our thoughts and a lot of the circumstances in our life and make us act in certain ways. That is all very normal and all can be kind of related back to this survival. Some examples could be that, for one, we have really significant impact of emotions on how we act. So think of that like our fight or flight response. Because we can feel our emotions physically in our body, we're really alerted to danger and fear and other strong emotions and want to avoid those feelings to maintain our survival. When we avoid those feelings and other uncomfortable or painful emotions that may feel similar, it doesn't allow us to process them correctly. And so we end up resisting or distracting, buffering, spiraling, or maybe reacting. We'll dive deeper into these emotional responses a little bit later this year. We also may not take risks and like to stay in our comfort zone. This really limits our curiosity, and you can think back to those times where things maybe didn't seem safe, or they may not want to go into unknown areas. That was important for them because if they did, they could encounter something that could cause them to die. Well, for us, it can feel the same even when it's not that risk, but our brain still doesn't want us to experience that because it's uncomfortable. And so it can limit us in what we continue to pursue and the different challenges we face. We also know that we like to classify information in our brains. This helps save time and energy and can be really useful. When we think back to those cavemen again, we can look at, they probably classified, hey, this food was safe when I ate it. This food maybe wasn't. Maybe they learn which areas are really good for hunting and which ones aren't. And so just know that those are the places to go to. They don't really have to think about it. They don't also have time to weigh information in those risky experiences. So if a lion starts chasing them, they're not going to have time to think about whether they know whether that animal is dangerous or not. That quick decision making is really useful for us, but also can lead to a lot of subconscious bias and inaccurate beliefs or irrational fears. Because of all of these things, it's really easy to recognize how we're really responsive to a lot of the emotions we have because of the way that those emotions feel in our body and the way that our brain interprets those feelings as potential danger. And again, wants to keep us alive, and so tries to limit the way that we act. I would like to introduce you now to the part of our brain that is responsible for the survival-based mentality. It's our amygdala. It's that little almond-shaped part of our brain that's really responsible for our lower and primitive thinking. It really wants to keep us safe and works to detect danger everywhere it can. But it's difficult because it can't tell the difference between that lion we talked about that might be chasing that caveman versus a presentation we're just really nervous about. It's also the part of our brain that likes to tell us stories. Think of it as your personal narrator, storyteller, or the constant chatter at the back of your mind. It can pop up at any time, sometimes unannounced, and often unwelcome. And now take a moment to think, how does this narrator have thoughts that come up for you? What are some of the thoughts you have that you notice are circulating at any given time? And are there patterns to those thoughts? This is what we'll start to investigate a little bit more of today. As you think of those thoughts or that chatter, do they always seem to be working in your best interest? I think most of us would answer no. Sometimes they're really darn negative and tell us a lot of things that we know deep down are not really true. These thoughts, while often coming from the best intentions, like keeping you safe and free from danger, are not always speaking in your best interest. But many of us don't even recognize that this inner dialogue is going on, let alone that we have a choice of what stories we listen to and have the ability to change them. This power is really where we get to decide what thoughts we want to identify with, and this really helps us understand our higher thinking. And this really determines who you are. Can you think of examples that you have of long-lasting or recurring thoughts that come up for you? Write them down. Make your own list. Think of all the thoughts that you have that go through your head, the positive ones and the negative ones. Reflect on this and know that you get to pick which ones you listen to. What are some examples that come up? I know for me, there's often been thoughts of, gosh, you'll never be as smart as your colleagues. Maybe you let people down. Maybe you failed before. Do those thoughts keep circulating? Those are the ones that maybe aren't based in fact, but really are there to try to prevent us from feeling badly. And so those are the ones we want to focus on. Data shows that we have over 6,000 thoughts a day, or about 6.5 per minute. We also know that about 75% of these are negative, and that's for all of us. Our objective will be the following, and over the course of the year, we'll be teaching you several tools that will be useful in helping you gain better understanding and control of your thoughts. We will learn to recognize the thoughts that are circulating in our mind by being the watcher and through thought downloading. We'll understand why they are there, using the default feasible paradigm. We'll decide if and how we want to change our thoughts, learning that we get to choose which ones we want to believe and which ones we want to have. The tools that we'll use will be the emotional reboot, intentional paradigm, and paradigm shifts. Lastly, I want to stress that the greatest teacher we have is our own intuition. As I mentioned in the beginning, learning to trust that gut, learning to trust yourself is really important here. And so while all of these tools can be useful, you and your understanding of yourself are the greatest tool you have. Now, I think it's also important to stress that despite all of these tools, old thoughts that are negative will still resurface, but you'll have the tools to address them, so their effect on you will not be as strong. Your brain will not be ruling you, you will be ruling your brain. So I want to stress again, all of us will have painful and negative thoughts, and that's okay. All of us will experience a range of emotions, and that's okay too. Your brain, body, and mindset are all influenced by the quality of your self-talk. Those things you say to yourself and how you feel about it have a huge impact on your well-being. We want those thoughts to be positive, kind, supporting, and validating, and not negative or unkind, critical, or hurtful. Remember that there are no shoulds here. There's nothing you have to do, and there's nothing that you've done wrong. Remember that you are not your thoughts, and you get to choose what you want to believe. It's those thoughts that we decide we want to attach to that can create a lot of inner turmoil and disconnect. This is all incredibly normal. Your thoughts, your feelings, and the way your brain works, again, there's nothing wrong with you, you're just human. Part of having a normal human brain is, again, operating from that survival mentality. Your brain really wants to keep you alive and protect you from any dangers, and it takes its job very seriously. Because of this, it would much rather be right than be happy. There are 3 ways that your brain really works to try to protect you. I like to call these the 3 E's. One is through enjoyment, through seeking pleasure or instant gratification. Another is what I like to call the easy street. This is avoiding pain and staying safe. We do anything we can to try to avoid those really uncomfortable feelings. And the last is energy conservation. This is embracing the comfort zone. Like we talked about earlier, that comfort zone was really important back in the time where they didn't know what things may pose a real danger to their survival. Now it can become something that really limits us in our ability to function in day-to-day life. We will get to learn more about these in the coming weeks, but in the meantime, I'd like to challenge you to start to imagine the ways you see this show up in your brain. Now, how do we do that? I want to introduce you to what we call the watcher. We'll learn more about this in our supplemental video, but I'd like to introduce this concept to you today. The watcher is your compassionate, non-judgmental, neutral, and curious observer of your thoughts. It's this idea of you are just there to watch and observe, you remain neutral and compassionate to the thoughts that you have, and really non-judgmental. Because remember, you are not your thoughts, but instead the watcher or listener of your thoughts. The more you identify with the watcher and the less with your thoughts, the more power you'll have over your mind and over your life. So how do we do this? We first start by identifying our thoughts, by really choosing to sit and listen to see what they're saying. And then also looking to see, how do they make us feel? Does one thought make us feel one way and another thought make us feel another way? Remember, it's really important here to avoid judgment. The watcher does not get to have an opinion. They're really the unbiased, compassionate observer. We'll eventually learn that we can have a choice over the thoughts that we have, but for right now, it's really important just to take that step back and recognize the thoughts we're having. This can take a lot of practice, and there's no finish line at the end. It's really just becoming more strong at watching the thoughts that you have and seeing how they impact your day-to-day life. So let's try to work through it here. What is your mind telling you? Can you think of a negative thought you've had about yourself? When do you remember it first appearing? And where do you think it stemmed from? What started it all? Is there any other history that's associated with this thought? Now, just let it be there. Let it sit for a second. If you can think about it, what alternate thoughts may be available to you if this is one that doesn't really feel very good? And what does this whole process feel like? It's really important to take time here to really work through this. So if I think about a thought I've had, for example, it would be that if I failed at something, it was because I didn't work hard enough. Now, when did this start? Gosh, I've had thoughts like that since as long as I can remember. Where did it stem from? I think it was that I just really operated in an achievement mindset. It was always the next step and the next thing. And that if I didn't get to that phase or reach my goals, I blamed myself for it. I can't think of any associated history with it right now. I think it's just something that has showed up in a lot of different areas of my life, both in my athletics, in school, in my practice now as a physician. Now, if I let it just sit there and think about what alternate thoughts I could have around that, maybe it's that I've always tried to make the next best decision. I've tried to work as hard as I can, and maybe that really was enough. And if I didn't achieve something this time, it doesn't mean I won't in the future. I recognize that I'm worthy regardless of my accomplishments. And so as I start to think through that, I realize that that original thought I had really didn't have a lot of fact with it. And that there were a lot of alternate thoughts that I maybe could really believe at this point. This is kind of how you start to work through these things. And I encourage you to start to do this yourself. As we start to look at our thoughts, it can become easier to understand how they really become the framework for our mindset and our beliefs. We know that there are really two types of mindset. Fixed, which is where you believe that your skills and intelligence are set from birth. So you believe that people are naturally good or bad at things, and there's really no ability to change that. And then there's growth mindset. This is where you believe that skills or intelligence are grown and developed. You're able to build your skills. You may not start out with something, but you can develop it over time. Typically, people have different mindsets for different circumstances, and we all probably have a combination of these. But it's important to start to recognize how they can play a role in how we think and believe. I'd love to share this quote by Gandhi that I think really exhibits a lot of the things that we're discussing today. He says, "Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny." This is so true and really helps to kind of outline how it all gets started and evolves over time. I think the important things to remember here are that our thoughts do not equal truths, and our feelings do not equal facts. They are just things we have chosen to believe, whether factual or not. The things you believe about yourself are usually formed due to repetition of your thoughts. So let's explore this a bit. What do you believe now or in the past about your creative abilities, physical abilities, your body image, your ability to learn, ability to develop relationships? Start to look on these from a place of non-judgment and compassion, to start to understand how maybe there have been those thoughts that you've had over time that really have now turned into the things you believe about yourself. It can now be a little easier to understand how our repetitive thoughts and self-talk form our beliefs about ourselves and about the world around us. It shows us how they impact our mindset and ultimately shape us into the person we believe we are. Now, I'd like you to think of a thought that you currently don't believe but really wish you did. Now just imagine for a second that you could really accept this as truth. How would it make you feel? Would you act differently? Would it change your behaviors, how you respond to people or situations? What effect would that have? And do you think your life would be different? Now, it's really hard to jump from something we don't believe all the way to something we do believe, but maybe there's a bridge between there that you can start to explore. For example, it's really easy to think about something that you can't do. But instead of saying, I can't do X, to I can do X, maybe in between you could say, I haven't done that yet, or I am learning to do this new thing. Every thought we have leads to a specific outcome. And so if you want a different result, you can create it with new thoughts that you get to decide. So as we continue to dive deeper into our thoughts and beliefs, we eventually get to the idea of our psychological identity. So what is identity? The Berkeley Wellbeing Institute describes it as a person's sense of self, established by their unique characteristics, affiliations, and social roles. Merriam-Webster describes it as the distinguishing character or personality of an individual. Simply, it's how you view yourself. It's really independent of any outside data, perceptions, or knowledge of you, and may be the most important factor in determining the trajectory of your life, either to limit or to support you in your decisions and your actions. I really love that the origin of this word is really described as repeatedly, again and again, because I think it really supports this idea that repetitive thoughts can become our beliefs, and our beliefs really shape what we believe to be most true about ourselves and how we identify ourselves. Now, many people don't know that they can change or work to change their identity and believe solely that they are their shortcomings, their weaknesses, and their skill set. Have any of you ever said the following? This is just who I am. Or I've always been this way. I'm not this or that, or I could never do that. Now, are these really facts, or are they just the narrative that you've heard about yourself so many times that you believe it? These can then limit you because of the resulting emotions and thoughts that you have. But your identity is not set in stone, which is exciting. This gives you power. You get to decide how to define yourself and who you want to be. We get to challenge all of those old thoughts and beliefs and determine where we want to go with our life. So let's practice this a bit. Think of some old thoughts or beliefs that you have about the following: your personality, what shaped it? What do I think about my abilities? What thoughts do I have about myself that have helped me in my career? How about what are the thoughts that have helped me in my life? What's helped me in relationships? What do I believe about myself that will support me in the future? Now watch how your brain responds to these ideas. Is it offering you a lot of thoughts? Is it trying to challenge these beliefs that you think you have? Is it being kind? Are those thoughts that your brain is offering you really true? And do you have evidence to support them? Watch to see resistance come up to the thought of challenging these beliefs. They've been there for a long time, and so it can be really hard to change them, but it is possible. Now, there are many factors that make up our identity. Some of them you're born with, like your eye color and other physical characteristics. Others have been beliefs that you developed over time, and it's the beliefs that really limit you where we want to focus. These limiting beliefs will have a limiting impact on your life. I love this quote by Bob Proctor: "You can't escape from a prison until you recognize you're in one." People who have chosen to live within the limits of their old beliefs continue to have the same experiences. It takes effort and commitment to break old patterns. Now, it's important to state here that there's nothing wrong with you or because of what you have or currently think or believe. None of that is wrong. And while you have the power to change your thoughts or your beliefs, they aren't going to change overnight and will never go away completely, and all of that is okay. We all have limiting beliefs. This is common, but they are changeable if you want to change them. The first step is to create awareness and develop your watcher. We want to shed light on your thoughts and begin to recognize that the power they have over how we act and show up and the things that we believe. We get to decide which beliefs we want to challenge and work to develop new thoughts. And then we repeat these thoughts until we really believe them. And then those beliefs will eventually become what we identify with for our personalities. Now, as you think about some of those limiting thoughts or beliefs that you have, pick one and look at it more closely. How has this thought or belief made you feel? What outcomes do you think it has created? What do you think may be the connection between your outcomes and the thoughts or beliefs that you had that led you there? Then I'd like to challenge you to think of what your dream identity would look like. What do you think is keeping you from that? What comes up when you start to challenge this possibility and start to challenge your mind in that you get to have control over this? I want you to develop your curiosity here. Challenge that part of your brain that wants you to stay safe and begin to explore the thoughts and beliefs that you have about yourself. Remember back to our cavemen that we talked about earlier? We mentioned how that primitive brain loves to categorize information and assign meaning to everything. This is the last topic I really want to introduce to you today. By categorizing, our brain tends to tell us a lot of stories, and these shape how we show up in the world and ultimately develop our legacy. Now, our normal brain assigns meaning to all things through a filter with which we view the world. This filter is developed over time and has huge impacts on our beliefs, actions, behaviors, and habits, and these in turn reinforce the filter. That's bias. Your brain is simply trying to make it easier for all of this input coming in to make sense, but it can lead to misinterpreting information. This leads to unconscious errors in thinking, problems with your memories, attention, or mental mistakes. It's our job to begin to recognize and understand what is fact and what is fiction. Did our brain misinterpret the information or assign meaning when there wasn't any? Would someone on the outside agree with what I believe to be the facts? Some examples here looking at finances. If someone said, I am bad at money management, they may really believe that, but someone on the outside might think that they're a lot worse and really think that person does a great job, so they may not agree. That would be a story. Now, if someone said, I've saved $100,000 for my retirement, that's a fact. They have that data to support it. If someone else would say, I don't have enough money to travel, that's really a story because that can be interpreted very differently. What does enough mean? But if someone else said, my bills total $2,000 a month, that's very specific. That would be a fact. Now you can see how a lot of those things could probably be believed just as strongly from one person to the next, or even the same person believing all of those things about themselves. So this is where I challenge you, start to look and see, are the things I'm telling myself based in data and fact? Or are they things that I've just believed over time because of what I tell myself? Now, I mentioned that our normal brain is prone to bias. We're going to talk about a couple of those types today, and in one of your supplemental videos, we'll be going a lot deeper into these concepts. When we look at cognitive bias, this is really our brain's way of continually confirming our thoughts to reinforce our belief system. Remember how I said our brain loves to be right much more than it likes to be happy. One of the ways is through misinformation bias, so remembering things differently than how they really happened. One of the examples of this would be a classic witness statement. They may be certain that the person was this tall or had this colored hair, but when they go back, they find that a lot of that information is actually incorrect, no matter how strongly the person believes it. Confirmation bias is another example of this. This is where we look for or only pay attention to the information that really confirms or validates our existing beliefs. And remember, a belief does not always equal a fact. Another example would be hindsight, saying you knew something was going to happen after the fact. And another example would be the halo effect. This is where attractiveness, confidence, and other positive traits have a greater influence on what we think about someone as far as their intelligence or competence, their kindness, or the value they have. Remember, this desire to be right can significantly affect our decisions and behaviors and ultimately lead to different outcomes or results than we may intend. When we look at negativity bias, this is our brain's default processing. Remember how I said that our brain has about 80% negative thoughts? This is what's keeping us safe from any real or perceived danger. We know that our adverse beliefs have a greater effect on our mental state than positive ones. We feel them more intensely, so our brain interprets them more intensely and wants to avoid it at all costs. How does this show up? Well, we remember our losses and our failures much more than our wins, and we may make them mean something about ourselves that isn't really true. We tend to weigh negative information much greater than positive information. And we know that our negative emotions have significant influence on our experience and our memories, much more than our positive emotions do. So you tend to remember those times that things made you really sad or angry or feel badly about yourself, much more than those times when you felt happy or content or joyful. Learning to distinguish the facts from our fiction or stories is one of the greatest tools that you can develop to manage your mind. We have control over how we respond to any situation by how we assign meaning to our experiences. And this is where our power comes from. Remember, you're the only one that gets to write your story. As we come to a close here today, I would like to offer one last tool that I think will be really helpful as you begin to further investigate your thoughts and beliefs, your identity, and those facts or stories. It's called a thought download or mindful release. What is it? Simply, it's taking the time to write out or talk out our thoughts. You want to have it documented so you can look back to see what might be lurking beneath. Are there patterns in your thoughts, things that surprise you? This is really a way to declutter your mind. So if you're having trouble observing your thoughts, maybe you just need to get it all out there, and then you can go back and look at it for further understanding. So the only rule is that you want this to be unfiltered and uncensored. Don't think about what to write. It's not like a journaling practice where you have to answer a question. Now, sometimes prompts can be really useful to get started when it's not something you're used to, but you really want to write about everything you're thinking. Don't let anything be held up or stopped. You want this to be uncensored. This can be done following difficult experiences, during emotional spirals, or as part of a journaling practice if you already have one. What I want to stress is that this does not have to take a lot of time or effort. Start with once a week. Take a time where you're feeling more of that emotional turmoil and say, instead of staying here, how about I start to write my thoughts down and just see what comes up? It can be really useful as we begin to work through these. Our supplemental lectures will be helping you and guiding you through other prompts and things that can be helpful. But I'll include some on the next page that can be a way to get started if you're struggling to know where to begin. A thought-provoking question like those listed here that we covered earlier today can really help to get you started. This will become easier with practice, and sometimes you'll find that you begin to kind of go through your thought download without even really thinking about it in your mind. Now, as I mentioned, it can be much more useful to have it written down because I think it will uncover some patterns and things that you really didn't expect to see when you have a chance to go back and look through them. So set a goal and challenge yourself in those difficult moments to use this tool as a way to develop your awareness and work through what's happening in your mind. I want to thank you for the attention and time you've given me today. I know I've provided you with a lot of information and 2 new tools that I think will be really useful as you start to look deeper into your thoughts and beliefs. So where do you go from here? Well, I challenge you to practice and be curious as you begin to look at your thoughts and beliefs. And remember to do it from a place of self-compassion and non-judgment. What will come next is some supplemental recorded lectures and videos that you'll be able to access on the USD website. For those of you who have received the Well-Being, the 5 Essential Elements book, I'd love for you to look through that more deeply. And lastly, we plan to hold a quarterly Q&A session as we work through this wellness curriculum. That time and date is to be determined and will be provided to you by Dr. Brown. Lastly, I offer if you have any questions to please get in touch with me at any time, and also to remember what resources you have available through USD and your institutions. I've included my contact information here as well as other suggested resources should you have any questions, concerns, or need any help with anything. I look forward to seeing some of you at the Q&A sessions and can't wait to work through the rest of the curriculum this year. Have a great day.